With ICARH International, and thank you very much to the panelists and the organizers for this very interesting discussion. So I found the presentations very interesting, and a number of you touched upon various linkages between sexual orientation, gender identity, and other forms of rights issues such as poverty, education, housing, etc. And it seems to me that there are connections between those discussions and some of the issues being addressed in the post-2015 development agenda. So I wondered if that was an issue that any of the panelists are following, or if we had comments or recommendations for states in terms of how the issues could be integrated throughout that UN priority.
We have to bring that up. Do you want to say something like that? Go ahead.
Do you want to take any more questions?
I didn't see any. Okay, Andrew.
Thank you very much to all the panelists. Thinking about the UN here, and obviously there's always resolution negotiations going on, and we're always sitting working with different wording to include. And I know that governments who are in this room are continually facing the challenge of should we be pushing to include the words sexual orientation and gender identity in as many times as possible as one strategy. I just wondered if the panelists had any thoughts whether that was a good strategy, to what degree we should be trying to include direct references to sexual orientation and gender identity, and to what degree they felt it was more useful to approach it in a more intersectional way or obliquely around the issue so it's not overly politicized. Thanks.
Okay. Any other person? No? Okay. Micah, do you want to respond to John, please?
Thanks for the important question. Certainly, as an office, in the context of the post-2015 agenda and the negotiations around the Sustainable Development Goals and the framework that's going to replace and build on the work that was done for the Millennium Development Goals. One of the strong emphases that we have and that we feel is very important is to ensure that non-discrimination is at the heart, and human rights, and including the principle of non-discrimination, is at the heart of the post-2015 agenda. And obviously, that also concerns and regards discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. So would certainly encourage, and I think we've seen a lot of debates and discussions on, okay, how exactly does that then materialize itself in specific targets, in the specific objectives that will be elaborated and negotiated. But I think it will be very important to keep this very strong focus on human rights and non-discrimination at the center of advocacy around the post-2015 agenda, and I would encourage all to ensure that, because I think if we've seen that one of the shortcomings of the MDG framework is in fact that it left marginalized persons often behind, and so while we saw impressive improvements in access to some rights under the MDGs, certain groups of people didn't see those improvements and were sort of invisible in that framework. And I think if there's one lesson to be learned in that case is to focus on human rights and anti-discrimination, which especially focuses on those persons that face the gravest violations of rights.
Thank you very much, Michael. Sunita, you want to add something? Thank you.
Mine is not so much just to respond to both John and John. I think the MDGs weren't, I think, very political, and for us working on SOGI issues, I mean, it is a very political and contentious issue. So I'm not sure whether post 2015 will do justice to what we want. So I think our fight is much longer. If there is anything like Michael is saying that we can include and push at the post 2015 discussions and negotiations, we must. But I think the fight is much longer because MDGs really weren't, left out a lot of things that traditionally, whether it was ICPD had included, so that's what it is. in terms of, language here at the HRC, I think both things could work. Where it is possible and is necessary, I think we must include specific in SOGI language, but then also if that is not possible, to leave it more open to include as many people, as many groups, and as many issues that we can. So both the things could work really. It's a matter of strategy, and you're not sure what might work there.
Thank you. Tilaga, please.
Just in terms of the language, I think it also depends on the understanding of the governments and states of what is gender. Because, for instance, like in Malaysia, the constitution says that everyone is equal regardless of gender, right? But the ministers and and the government feel like gender is only exclusive to men and women, right? Not anyone else aside from men and women. So I think it's also it also depends on the understanding of the government and states on what they mean by human rights for all, right? And I think it should be on a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
Heather, I'd asked you earlier about what does it mean to perhaps expand mandates of special rapporteurs, like special rapporteur on minority issues and human rights defenders issues, on this issue of intersectionality. Thank you.
Thanks. I will address that question in the course of also responding to Andre's question on language. So I think, there's a lot to be said for mainstreaming SOGI issues throughout different mandates and throughout different resolutions. I do think that sometimes if you're in a resolution negotiation and insisting on inserting sexual orientation, gender identity language, it can often have the opposite effect, that it actually kind of highlights it and perpetuates the exceptionalism argument sometimes. And I think in some ways, the question you raised, Joseph, about special rapporteur mandates, I wouldn't say expanding the mandates, because I think these mandates already have it within the terms of their terms of reference to take up issues of sexual orientation and gender identity. So, for example, you mentioned the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, and she is obviously finishing up her mandate at the moment, but she's actually picked up LGBTI defenders as a group at particular risk alongside a range of other groups, including those I mentioned earlier, defenders working on corporate accountability and women human rights defenders. So it's fully within her mandate to do that. Likewise, the Special Rapporteur on Right to Health has done that. And I think there's huge potential across the board for mandate holders to be picking up issues of sexual orientation and gender identity, because they do fall within their mandates. There's no need to expand their mandates at all. In some cases, maybe they're not doing that because they're just simply, it's just not really on their radar especially. So I think there's potential for human rights defenders themselves to be approaching these mandate holders and actually ensuring that they are picking up these issues within their reports. I also wanted to say that nationally, I think I mentioned when I spoke earlier, there's no contradiction between a particular focus on LGBT rights and also working on cross-cutting issues. In fact, I think that particular focus is necessary to ensure that this mainstreaming is happening. And likewise, at the international level, there's no contradiction that I see in encouraging that mainstream across special rapporteur mandate holders, but also keeping in mind, with a view to potential future action by the Council, that there's no contradiction with also having a particular focus on issues of sexual orientation, gender identity. And that could actually encourage those mandate holders who aren't currently picking up on those issues to actually keep it in the back of their minds and be incorporating it in their work when they're actually producing their reports and reporting to the Council.
Okay, thank you very much, Heather. But still on the mandate issue, because I understand that the special rapporteur on minority issue was in Nigeria the other day, and some activists had written to her, and then they responded saying that no, it's not within the mandate. So what does this mean to intersectionality on demand and in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity issues, given that the LGBT community are often classified as sexual minorities? Now, what do you have to say about that? And I think that Michael, okay, maybe Michael can take that on. Thank you, Michael.
Sure. I mean, just with regards to the independent expert on minority issues, her mandate has been defined by the Council to focus on the declaration, the UN Declaration on the rights of national, ethnic, and religious minorities. And so it's the focus it's the focus given by the Council to that specific mandate, which means that unless the issue regards LGBTI persons within those specific minorities as inserted into that mandate by the Council, it's difficult for the independent expert to address instances of human rights violations facing LGBTI persons more generally when it's not able to be directly linked to how the mandate was defined by the Council. So that's a little bit the issue facing that. But obviously, to persons outside the world of UN human rights protection system, this independent expert on minorities, obviously LGBTI persons are indeed referred to as a sexual minority by many. So that's some of the unfortunate confusion that can arise, and indeed I think Heather's pointed out to the fact that many special rapporteurs, when they are able to, have been doing a lot of work on the protection of the rights of LGBTI persons within the context of their mandate, whether that's the Special Rapporteur on Torture, the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Health, and many others, as well as treaty bodies as well.
Thank you, Michael. Do we have any other question from the floor? Yes, please.
Hello, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I don't have much of a question, but more of a comment to come back on Andrew's question regarding language.
So excuse me, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. My name is Alexander Tadian. I work at ILO AIDS. And to answer the previous question, ILO has adopted a resolution in 2010, Resolution 200 on HIV and AIDS and the world of work. And it specifically made the decision to address sexual orientation and gender identity. It provides that there should be no discrimination and stigmatization of all workers on the basis of their real or perceived HIV status and sexual orientation, and it provides that there should be involvement and empowerment of all workers regardless of their sexual orientation. And then we've seen that this specific language has had a positive impact in different countries on a legislative level, but also on a more on a level of companies that have adopted new workplace policies and programs which not only address HIV issues, but also the matter of gender equality and equality for the LGBT community. So I don't know if it answers the question, but I feel like addressing specifically sexual orientation in international standards, new international standards, can have a positive effect. And I brought copies of the resolution if you want a copy, and I have CDs of all the work that ILO has been doing, so feel free to stop by and get a copy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the floor or questions? No. Andrea.
Forgive me for taking the floor for a second time. I didn't introduce myself. Sorry, Andre Duplessis with the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans and Intersex Association. I'm just thinking back to the Council, and when we hear statements coming out opposed to sexual orientation and gender identity, one of the arguments that we consistently hear is, that this Council should not be considering anything to do with personal choices that people make. And I was just interested, Sunita, when you were making your presentation, you talked about people facing issues of people transgressing gender norms. And you said for some people it's same-sex choices that they make, and for others it's other choices that they make. And I'm just interested on, it's a complicated question, but sexual orientation, to quote Lady Gaga, apparently we're all born this way. And it's not a choice, is one of the big arguments that goes out at the moment. And I'm just interested to know what is the balance between the sexual rights movement more generally, where we are talking about sexual choices that people make, and then also within the sexual orientation, gender identity debate, where we're arguing often that this is not a choice that people have made either on their sexual orientation or on their gender identity, or on their bodily diversity. And I just don't know if that helps us in understanding or taking forward the debate.
Thanks, John.
Livia Zilli from the International Commission of Jurists. Thank you very much for the really interesting presentations. My question relates to the situation in Nigeria, and I wondered whether if Iani or our chair indeed know of any movement afoot in the country to possibly challenge the law when it's gazetted. Thank you.
Okay. If I will be responding to that, but let me take another question from the back there. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Serayun. I'm from UNHCR. I have a question about terminology on LGBTI and SOGI. So it seems that we use these two terms interchangeably, but in terms of mainstreaming those languages, it's better to use LGBTI or sexual orientation and gender identity, because I think UN organizations are moving towards SOGI, but SOGI is not all inclusive, it excludes intersex people. But on the other hand, LGBTI excludes those cultural gender identities, specifically not LGBTI. So I was wondering which is better approach, or is there any all-inclusive terms for those people? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Any other question? Okay. If I do you want to respond to the question?
Yes, thank you very much for your question. Already, the movement in Nigeria is already putting together a group of lawyers who have experts in litigation on human rights and LGBTI issues, and we have a window of opportunity which says you have to bring a petition or challenge the case in court 3 months after the bill becomes a law, and that opportunity ends on the 7th of April. So we are working on that already. Yes.
Okay, but just to perhaps if you could also respond to what it means for these law being signed, not gazetted. So does it mean that we have to wait for it to be gazetted before you can litigate? What does it mean? If it's not gazetted, does it mean it cannot be implemented? Yes.
Okay. Basically, we thought that was what the case was, that we have to wait for the law to be gazetted. But when we sought, we asked questions, we were told that we can litigate, we can file petitions and file suits in court, even with the law not being gazetted. And we hoped that that was going to happen immediately after the law was passed. But it seems like nothing has been talked about getting the law gazetted. But a lot of things are happening already, so we have decided to move forward with even the law is gazetted or not.
Okay, and implementation?
Yes.
Yes.
Implementation of
Yeah, it's not gazetted, so does it mean that it cannot be enforced?
Of course, yes, it can be enforced unless it's being gazetted. But then, as we know, the Nigerian police and law enforcement agencies probably do not have understanding of that, or do not even care if that happens or not.
Okay, cool. So we're just going to respond to Andres questions, Anita?
I think I'll try and answer your question. I think looking at consent as a standard, I think that's a very useful way of understanding or giving legitimacy to something. So whether it's choice or not, I mean, we can go on about the debate. But I think as long as there is consent, so if it is a relationship, so whether it is same sex, opposite sex, whatever, intercaste, interreligious, whatever, yeah. I think, no, because the thing is that in terms of consent, why I'm saying consent for a lot of, women, at least in the South Asian region also, because then it kind of cuts across a lot of things. So it's just not about, same-sex relationship. Consent is something that is not taken, given, understood. And so it's the families who decide, it's, the community that will decide, it is a lot of other people will decide, but the person that actually, in question. So I think I find it very useful to look at consent, and if that can be a standard of whether we are saying, yes or no, what we are choosing, who we are choosing, what we choose to do, not to do, where to be, not to be in terms of mobility. So that I think is very useful. So I don't know if I'm adequately answered your question. I think in terms of the language, in terms of including intersex or having something that is culturally contextual, I think that's a very good question. I think these are evolving discussions and terminologies. Also in terms of just human rights, how we understand human rights also is an evolving kind of thing. Many years ago there wasn't sexual orientation, gender identity. Now we do talk about it. We're trying to bring it into the mainstream discourse, and there wasn't a language for sexual rights, but now we're trying to bring it. So yes, I think we should keep working with that, understanding that there are limitations to some things, some language, but how do we become more inclusive, and how do we understand the different contexts and cultures more? Because one thing that is always thrown at us is, I think that this is Western is not cultural, and that is something that we have to keep pushing back and saying, no, it is within our cultures, to be talking about this, or these do exist. So yes, I suppose we have to continue evolving newer things. Yeah.
Michael, your contribution.
Thanks, Joseph. I just want to get back to Andre around the choice or born this way, and the criticism of working on sexual orientation and gender identity or the rights of LGBTI persons. I think the High Commission has been very clear in her responses to states when questioned on this, and it says, basically, OSCHR and the High Commissioner, almost every day receives instances of violations of rights of persons. And these are not different rights, these are exactly the same rights that she as High Commissioner and the office is mandated to address, and the rights that she's mandated to protect. So there's no controversy in the office or in the UN with regards to this. This is our mandate to work on. And so the choice versus born this way question sort of becomes less relevant in that context, because we're talking about human beings who face violations of human rights that are enshrined in international human rights law. So I do think that that question is raised often in different debates, but with regards to the office's work and our mandate as given in the foundation and the UN Charter, it doesn't really change that much. We have a mandate, and we need to work on these issues. On the question of terminology, I completely agree with Sunita. It's an evolving discussion that has evolved in the past decades, and I'm sure will continue to do so. And the idea is to try not to exclude persons and to recognize different sets of human rights violations that occur. So we try to be as accurate as possible, and that goes a little bit back to the fact that LGBTI persons don't necessarily face the same types of violations, so it's not always appropriate to talk, for example, with LGBTI persons when referring to specific violations. Intersex persons may face very different sets of human rights challenges than LGBT persons or transgender persons. So to try to always be accurate when discussing a specific topic. And having said that, it also goes back to how the international human rights law jurisprudence is evolving, and we've seen increasing attention, for example, to the situation of intersex persons by treaty bodies, and I think we'll see further evolution as treaty bodies come more into contact, and special rapporteurs come more into contact with human rights violations linked to intersex persons. We'll see an evolution of international human rights law and clarification in that context. So I think the point is to try to be as inclusive as possible, as accurate as possible, and to keep questioning whether we are using the right terminology or not. And there's one fun thing, going back a bit to the point by Alexander from ILO AIDS, just to say, and I'm sorry I didn't flag it before, that the office has produced a useful guide to all international human rights law references to sexual orientation and gender identity, which is this Born Free and Equal guide. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, but if you're not, it's a very useful guide for states on what international human rights law bodies say their obligations are with regards to the protection of the rights of LGBTI persons or sexual orientation and gender identity. So I'd encourage you to look at that, and it's on our website. And the UN Free and Equal campaign is also an awareness-raising campaign, which goes to the heart of this discussion that the rights of LGBTI persons are just that, human rights, the same rights as all else. So I'd encourage you to look at the campaign material as well on the web.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. We have 3 minutes to the end of the session, but I'm just going to take that one last question. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Hani. I'm from the Association for Progressive Communications. So APC works with Empower, which is an organization in Malaysia, co-secretary of Comango, the report that ILGA was talking about. So in terms of, I wanted to address the gentleman's question. Oh, and now he's left, but never mind. I try and use SOGI rights when I'm having a discussion about rights, because to me, when you say LGBTIQ, that is descriptive of a person. So I think in different contexts, I will use it in different ways, but I generally try to also use SOGI rights because it's something new. So they always ask them, oh, what are you talking about? So that's an in, it's an opportunity for me to discuss. Whereas when I say LGBTIQ, there's an instant shutdown. So I think this is a good way to kind of like figure out what's your audience and what's the context of speaking. But SOGI rights generally.
Thanks, Hani. We have 2 minutes to the end of the section, but I don't know if any of the panelists have the last word to share with us. Perhaps as a matter of recommendation, what do you feel at the Human Rights Council we should be pushing for in terms of intersectionality on LGBTI human rights issues? Should I get you up? Do you have a... yeah? Yeah?
I mean, I think I've kind of said much of this already, but I think the states should be looking, as I said, to contextualize statements on violations against LGBTI persons, to bring out those underlying deeper issues that are actually contributing to those violations. I think at the same time we should be encouraging special procedures across the board to pick up these issues. I think really the emphasis should be on a combined mainstreaming and focused approach, but the mainstreaming is really important to counter the argument about exceptionalism, which is really hindering the work, I think, both internationally and nationally.
Thanks, Heather. Yeah, we have a minute to go, and I'm going to use this opportunity to say thank you to everyone, especially those who have worked very hard to organize this panel. And thank you to International Service for Human Rights and the ICARH, and to Lager and Ifeanyi and Michael. Thanks for coming along, and also to Ulysses, who is behind the camera and who has been working really very hard to make sure that this panel becomes successful as it is today. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you coming and listening. I hope that this will impact really positively to our advocacy here at the Human Rights Council. Thank you and have a good day. Bye.